there's a confluence of elements here. Rav Tzadok HaKohen Melublin, Schus Yagan Aleinu, Teshuvah, the ability to return to health, to return to something simpler, more tamim, more pure, more innocent. Motzei Shabbos, which is seemingly a time of mourning, the loss of Shabbos. And the secret of Malava Malka, which is how we comfort ourselves in the loss of Shabbos. And so we're gonna talk about all of these things, but the goal will be to have a her Teshuvah in one way or another, which is to open ourselves up to the fact that we are far closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu than we ever imagined ourselves to be, and that Hashem is far closer to us than we could have ever imagined Him to be. That the matter is very, very close to you, exceedingly close to you, as close as existence itself, as close as consciousness itself. And every time we're able to tap back into that awareness, we're entering into Teshuvah. Right? We're entering into Teshuvah when we return back to the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is right here. When we return back to the fact that all that exists is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I'm not talking about Teshuvah Tata. I'm not talking about the Rambam's halachos of Teshuvah. All of those are fundamental, and all of that work is fundamental. But in the end of the day, all of it is still saying that we're fine no matter what. All of it. That a person is fine no matter what. You have to go through a lot of effort. But Teshuvah always means that a person is fine no matter what. That Hashem has given us a gift of realizing that we're always fine. That we come back to Him. The question is, why does Teshuvah have to be an act of return? Why does it have to be returning from someplace, from a place of distance? Right? To return implies that I was once someplace and now I've distanced myself from that place. And if I push myself forward, I can return back to the place that I once was. Right? So return, the notion of returning, already implies a pre-existing sense of distance. And the question is why? Why does there have to be distance in our relationship with Hashem, in our relationship with ourselves, with reality, in order for us to then come close to Hashem? Theoretically, we could assume that Hashem would want us to experience everything all at once, to be able to be fully present, without duration, without time, without being late, without having to crawl back, without having to return to fight back into some place that I already lost. Meaning, why couldn't Hashem have made it that we don't have to do Teshuvah, that we could be tzaddikim, that we live with a perpetual awareness of God, that I'm not bothered by the concerns of day-to-day life, I'm not bothered by the relationship issues, I'm not bothered by the child issues, I'm not bothered by the parnasa, I'm not bothered by the politics or the narrative, right? It would be much easier for Hashem to have given us just unadulterated Einon Milvado consciousness, so we don't have to have Teshuvah, we can live in Bittul. And so the matter is as follows. The matter is as follows, that before the Chet of Eitz HaDa'as, Adam and Chava were placed into Gan Eden, la'avda u'lashamra, to guard it and to cultivate it. Now we have to understand that Adam and Chava, contrary to popular opinion, were not perfect when they were placed into Gan Eden. They were not whole. They were not God, obviously. Right? They were lacking certain modes of consciousness that they needed to develop. There was work to be done. Just like we have work to do, they had work that needed to be done. Avda means that I have to cultivate something, which means that if I don't cultivate it, it will lay fallow. And Shamra, guarding it, implies that if I don't guard it, there's a threat. Meaning, even before the Chet of the Eitz HaDa'as, human beings emerged into the world imperfect. But the imperfection that we experienced before the Chet of the Eitz HaDa'as, we weren't self-conscious about it. We knew what we were. Adam HaRishon never mistook himself for Hashem. The Malachim did. Right? The celestial forces wanted to pray in one way or another to Adam HaRishon. Adam HaRishon's heel blotted out the light of the sun. I mean, we're talking about someone who is Ra'ah Me'Seifa Ilamat Sofa, the purest form of neshama to have ever existed. And that we're all an unfolding process of Adam HaRishon. But Adam HaRishon didn't have this mistaken notion that he was God before the Chet of the Eitz HaDa'as. He was. What was. He was a brilliant, shining shtick of Elokus that was placed within the body. Neshama shenasata b'tahorihi. There was no self-consciousness. They weren't monitoring their imperfections. They weren't monitoring the sense that they weren't God, or that they weren't perfect, or that things needed guarding and cultivation. They weren't anxious about it. They weren't bothered by it. They weren't conscious of it. As the Nefesh HaChaim brings the name of the Rambam from the Moreh Nevuchim, that ultimately the difference between before the Chet and after the Chet is self-consciousness, right? Is taste, is my own subjective orientation to this world. Prior to the Chet, things were. They either were or they weren't. They were true or untrue. After the Chet, we fall into a place of subjectivity, of consciousness, which is where it's either good or bad, it's sweet or sour. I like it or I don't like it. But what's very important for us to hold on to is that even before the Chet of the Eitz HaDa'as, Adam and Chava needed to do Teshuvah. They needed to return someplace. They needed to receive more moichin. They needed to grow spiritually. They needed to get back to a place of achdus that they were no longer operating at. They just weren't bogged down by the symptoms of being human. They were human, but they weren't affected by the human condition. There was no human condition. The human was a clear expression of neshama b'guf, Adam HaRishon. And what the Chet of the Eitz HaDa'as did was that what happens is we enter into a place of now being aware, being dreadfully aware of our imperfections, being aware of our deficiencies, being aware of the fact that we're not perfect and that we're not God. And we see this in every aspect of our lives, on the body level, on the emotional level, on the spiritual level, on the subconscious level, on even the highest, loftiest, unconscious levels available to our souls. The truest common denominator is that they are imperfect, that they're not whole. That nothing is whole other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the truest sense of the word. And so human consciousness, after the Chet of the Eitz HaDa'as, we become very aware of the fact that we're imperfect, and then we begin to feel the symptoms. Then we begin to see imperfection everywhere, and then comes Cain and Hevel. And that's the emergence of two different ways of grappling with human imperfection. Hevel says, Hevel havalim, akol Hevel, everything is, why should I care? I'm imperfect. Cain says, let me artificially create perfection. It's like the path of meditation and the path of addiction that kind of emerge into human consciousness. The two paths of dealing with, consciousness, of being a human being, of being distant. Everybody with me so far? And so, the goal of Teshuvah is not to become perfect. The goal of Teshuvah is to return back to a place where we're no longer bogged down by the symptoms of being imperfect, and we transform our imperfection into the place where new mitzvos can unfold, the mitzvah of Teshuvah, of kichui machem v'shuvu el Hashem, of bringing things back from this place of human consciousness, which is what the Alter Rebbe describes in Parak Lamed Vav as the dir b'tachtonim. Right? Hashem wants to reveal himself in the lowest place imaginable. The lowest garbage dump, not a garbage dump I should say. There's a Medrash Chazal that says the metaphor for God creating the world is like a king who decided to build his palace in a dunghill. So that is a real metaphor, and it's a very deep one. But the Baal Tanya doesn't say that the world is a garbage dump. He says that the human mind is the lowest possible place, because through the thickening of consciousness and self-consciousness, the self can come to a notion of being separate and apart and divided and independent of God's animating light. That's the Yerida Hayoter Gedola Sheyachol Liyot. When we feel that we're separate from the animating light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when we fall into this trap of being human. Being human is a strange, heavy thing. Kuli alma lo pligi. And if a person is just a human, without remembering who they actually are, then it becomes Gehenna. The secret of Teshuvah is returning back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu from within this place of self-consciousness, this dir b'tachtonim. And we remember Hashem, and we remember, I can be okay, I can return back, and I can let go of all of this guilt and the shame that's bogging me down and making me feel like I'm unworthy or undeserving to tap into the endless joy of Emunah and the well-being that comes with Emunah. And we push ourselves back into that place that we always already knew, that Hashem is here. We enter back. Every act of Teshuvah is entering back into Gan Eden and choosing to eat from the Eitz HaChaim again. Eating from the Eitz HaDa'as is feeling low about ourselves and feeling shameful about ourselves and feeling miserable about ourselves and judging ourselves and thinking about ourselves all the time and endlessly. Now, I don't know what everybody else does, but I think about myself a lot, more than anything. There's nothing I think more about than myself. And that's Eitz HaDa'as, right? When a person is thinking about themselves and thinking about what this means for me and how can I promote through this, or how can I get better at this, or how can I gain through this, or how can I devour through this, or how can I be safer through this, all of that self-interest is Eitz HaDa'as living. And all of that is just protective kind of defense mechanisms to try and cover up that one thing that none of us want to admit, but we're going to be forced to one way or another, is that we're not God. Right? A person comes into 12 steps. They say, forget about the complications of theology. Don't say whether you believe in God or not. Acknowledge that you're not God. Acknowledge that you're not God. And therein begins the process. I'm powerless. If I'm powerless, there's something that has more power than me. And so Teshuvah is the decision to stop eating from the Eitz HaDa'as and to begin eating from the Eitz HaChaim, which means that I'm not going to be stuck on self. Sure, I'm imperfect. I'm an imperfect creature. It's not my fault. You created me, Hashem. But instead of being occupied with all of the personal narrative stuff, which no matter how healthy all of us are, will ultimately make us feel not good enough. That's just the human condition, because we're not good enough. What could we do for Hashem? We can't do anything. We can't do anything. We don't know how big Hashem is. We can't do anything. Rebbe Nachman writes that if a person knew how big HaKadosh Baruch Hu was, the moment that they deviated, they would cease to exist because of the awe. But what do we know? And so, Bittul Teshuvah is returning back to a place of not being so caught up on what's right with me or what's wrong with me, or am I doing good enough, or what do I have to do better, and just going weiter into Elokus, going deeper into one's relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, eating from the Eitz HaChaim. Ever with me?
Teshuvah normally it's like Hashem and
I'm talking Teshuvah Mei'Ahavah, right? We're talking Rav Tzadok's Teshuvah. We're talking the Teshuvah that the Tzadikim Amitim revealed to us from the Heilige Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. That in the future, Bikshu es Avon Yisrael, they're going to search out the sins of Klal Yisrael, not because they're going to want to judge us, but because the sha'ashua, the joyfulness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu receives when a Yid returns from a place of lowliness is so unimaginable that when Mashiach comes, the Malachim are going to be like, where's that good stuff that HaKadosh Baruch Hu really likes, which is the Teshuvah? They're going to be searching out places of smallness and failure and struggle, because that's the place that the sha'ashua comes from. And everybody knows, as Rav Tzadok teaches us, the knowledge that everything is okay is not going to cause us to sin more. This is the big fear, because Shabtai Tzvi came and made the whole world crazy. Right? But we're not going to sin more. We're not going to want to bring a korban on a bama if we acknowledge that Hashem runs the world. We're going to want to do more mitzvahs, and we're going to feel better and less angry and less frustrated and less bothered, and want to do more chesed. That is what happens when a person drinks from the waters of Gan Eden. B'la'at ha'cheref ha'mesapeches is a myth. There's a rotating fiery sword, but it's a wooden sword. It's fine. Right? A person has to go in and they have to eat from the Eitz HaChaim. Eating from the Eitz HaChaim is realizing that I'm okay, Hashem. I don't have to monitor myself so much. I can leave it up to you. Let me go and do something good. Let me share light. Let me do a chesed. Let me do a mitzvah. Let me learn Torah. Let me take a breath of a person's in Eretz Yisrael. Right? Very often in Rebbe Nachman's stories, the person who finds himself in the world of the Eitz HaDa'as, already having fallen out of Gan Eden, that's usually how the stories start. Stories start after you've been kicked out of Gan Eden, and you find yourself in this place where you can smell Gan Eden, and the whole stories are ultimately about how to return back into Gan Eden, how to restore one's consciousness of being present with Hashem. And very often when the characters lose themselves, and they're overwhelmed by the details and the changes, they ask themselves, Heichan ani ba'olam? Heichan ani ba'olam? Where am I in the world? Where am I in the world? usually this takes place. Rebbe Nachman says what the character does first is Yishev es atzmam. They like sat down for a second. They gave themselves Yishev HaDa'as to, like, if I'm struggling this much anyway, I might as well figure out the point of it all. Right? I might as well figure out why I'm here. And in that place, a person says, like, where am I in the world? So Rav Avram ben Rav Nachman, Zchusi Hagan Aleinu, the Bir Halikutim, said that if a person is in Eretz Yisrael, they have to ask themselves the questions, Heichan ani ba'olam, where am I in the world? But they can also answer themselves in the next moment, Ani ba'Eretz Yisrael. At least I'm in Eretz Yisrael. And at least I'm in Eretz Yisrael. But to focus, there's a mitzvah t'midus of being in Eretz Yisrael. So when I stop focusing on my smallness and my katness and my undeservedness and my pegamim, I can think about being in Eretz Yisrael. I can think about the land of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. I can think about doing a mitzvah. A person has to learn the joy, the unimaginable joy of feeling that one has done any spiritual deed in this world. It's enough to spend an entire life in joy. The avodah of Teshuvah is coming back to a place of eating from the Eitz HaChaim, which means that I'm all right. And then we eat from the Eitz HaDa'as Tov. And the Ra lo toichal, like the Ishbitzer says. Then we eat from the Eitz HaDa'as, because a person of Ada will grow. I want to grow and I want to be a tzaddik, and I want to be a tzaddik tomorrow that makes the tzaddik that I was today look almost like a Rasha. That's how my hope and spiritual growth should be, but only after I eat from the Eitz HaChaim. Because if that's my orientation in the world of the Eitz HaDa'as, then I'm poisoning myself. Then it's a rat race. And then I'm always just fasting and sigufim and afraid that Hashem wants to punish and that Hashem is angry. Hashem does what He does. Hashem runs the world in the way that He runs the world. We have no idea of anything, let alone anything about what Hashem does. I wouldn't be able to tell you by gunpoint how pizza was made, meaning, or what plastic is made out of. There's nothing that I know. All the more so how HaKadosh Baruch Hu fears the Welt. We know that Choy Katoiv Lehetiv, and that Gam Sulatova. We stop focusing so much on how Hashem is running the world and how Hashem is running my own life, and I jump into the goodness, and I jump directly into the goodness. Once I eat from the Eitz HaChaim, then I could go down into the Eitz HaDa'as. Then it could be Oisek and Teshuvah. So when the Baal Shem Tov was born, the Chida writes that the old practices of Teshuvah, which were self-flagellatory and self-punishing and self-damning, they ceased to be relevant. Doesn't mean that every person who did those processes up until the moment that the Baal Shem Tov was born was doing something wrong. That was the way it was operating. Once the light of the Baal Shem Tov came into the world, there was a new path of Teshuvah that came into the world. And that path of Teshuvah is generally referred to or hinted to by Chazal as Teshuvah Mei'Ahavah. The way Rav Tzadok explains Teshuvah Mei'Ahavah is that coming to recognize that Hashem is here, there, and everywhere, past, present, and future. And Mamrim Hayinu, yeah, we certainly rebelled against you, Ribono Shel Olam, but Im Hashem, Mamrim Hayinu Im Hashem, even when we rebelled against you, we were with you. That's not to say, oh, let me go rebel more. It's I want to do more mitzvos and tshuva, but we have to accept ourselves fully, and we have to come with bittul and humility in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like Adam HaRishon prior to the Chet, who knew far more than anybody his limitations. It was the Eitz HaDa'as Tovara that brought this notion of perfection, this poisonous notion of perfection, into human consciousness. But the true power of Eitz HaChaim awareness is that I'm an imperfect creature who has a fundamentally unknowable and unbreakable bond uniquely with the unknowable Creator, with the Or Ein Sof. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu has decided for one way or another that Yidden should be able to grasp His light in this world. Ki karov elecha davar ma'od. Rav Kook writes that every Motzei Shabbos, Eliyahu HaNavi sits under the Eitz HaChaim, writing the Schuyos of Klal Yisrael. It's a medrash from the Tana de Eliyahu. Because the Tana de Eliyahu, it's a minhag to, have some tea or eat some soup and learn Tana de Eliyahu on Motzei Shabbos. Because again, Motzei Shabbos is marked by the specter of Eliyahu HaNavi. Right? We're all visited by Eliyahu HaNavi. And who was Eliyahu, and what's the connection to what we're doing here? So, Shabbos is Eitz HaChaim consciousness, right? Where Chazal dictate to us exactly what needs to be thought. They say a person has to see their matters as if all of their work is done. Ki'ilu kol melachtecha asuya. When Shabbos comes, a person has to feel that everything is all right. Everything's not all right. You have to look at it as if everything is all right. Ki'ilu. Ki'ilu is doing a lot, but Ki'ilu is a very important lumdus term. It's a real thing. And so Shabbos is a light of satisfaction, of all rightness, that by hook or by crook we enable ourselves to experience a taste of menucha, even for a minute. Menucha, the whole secret of everything is to come to a place of menucha, of sitting, of realizing that there's nothing chasing me and there's nothing I need to chase, and that all that I need is right here, and that I can grow endlessly from the place that I'm at. That's the light of Shabbos. Comes Motzei Shabbos and Oivei. Oivei is Rav Tzadok HaKohen Me'Lublin, whose yahrzeit it is tonight, and Kemat every drash on Motzei Shabbos that he would give Torah after Havdalah that are recorded in the Pre-Tzadiks. And he writes there very often that to understand Motzei Shabbos you have to understand the metaphor of being thrown Me'igra Rama Labira Amikta, from the loftiest of heights down to the lowest of depths. This traumatic fall from grace. Falling from the Eitz HaChaim back into the HaDa'as. Right, where now I'm exposed to all of the things and the tabs that are open, and the people and the this and the concerns and all of it. And that's where Eliyahu HaNavi comes. It's specifically there that Eliyahu HaNavi comes to teach us what? To teach us Teshuvah. To teach us how to return back to Hashem. Eliyahu HaNavi comes to the world to bring truth into the world. And truth is the revelation of Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. And that's Teshuvah. Eliyahu is the Mevaser Tov. He comes to deliver good news, which is that, guess what? You're still close to Hashem. Now, Motzei Shabbos was the time that Adam HaRishon and Chava were kicked out of Gan Eden. Tana de Eliyahu opens up that HaKadosh Baruch Hu almost divorced him. He gave a get of krisos and almost divorced himself, Kaviyachol, from Adam and Chava and sent them their way. And so every Erev Shabbos, every Motzei Shabbos, Eliyahu HaNavi comes to remind us that even though you're out of Gan Eden, you still have access to the Eitz HaChaim. You can still eat from the Eitz HaChaim. That's the mitzvah of Teshuvah. If Hashem didn't write the mitzvah of Teshuvah in the Torah, it would be kfirah to say it. If Hashem didn't explicitly tell us that we can change the past and that we are still close no matter what, then we wouldn't be able to say that what we're saying right now. But Eliyahu HaNavi comes to teach us that you can enter back into Eitz HaChaim consciousness any moment you choose. And that each day is in truth Shabbos. And that's why Eliyahu HaNavi comes, and Eliyahu HaNavi comes to deliver good news. But it's not Shabbos anymore, but it's the memory that I can return back any moment I choose. That's Teshuvah. I'm never more than one flick of the mind away from Kodesh HaKadoshim. Never. There's never a moment that I'm half step of consciousness away from being fundamentally close to the truest things that I need in my life in order to garner some comfort by way of faith. I must affirm those truths. I have to affirm the Yud Gimel Ikrei Emunah. The best of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu could possibly be. The way Rav Kook describes God is that it's just the best of the possible best, without any of the negativity that might come along with any of those adjectives that you apply as goodness. It's all of the good without any of the bad. Any level of comfort, any level of menucha and yeshiva das that a person cultivates in their mind by way of their concept of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is true. That's the way it is. It's true. Right? We're not going to think that God has a body. We're not going to think that God is limited. Why? Because we know Ori and Sof is just a revelation of God. It's not God himself. We never talk about God himself. So every good thing that we think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu is true. It's true, and that comfort that we believe in when we think about Hashem is true. When we know what the Eitz HaChaim means, when we know what the Eitz HaChaim means for each and every one of us, the answer to whatever the anxiety is, whatever the concern is, for a moment, right? The Eitz HaChaim doesn't provide comfort for more than a moment. That's the secret. If you still want comfort for more than the moment, then you're not by Eitz HaChaim. It's the funny thing about recovery in a 28-day program. A person comes in and they can't think. And what you tell them is one moment at a time. One moment at a time. And you're saying that almost like as a triage agent of like, you can't do more than that. Then after the graduation from a program, a person has gone through everything, like you want to say one last word. Like what's the secret of all things? One moment at a time. One moment at a time. It's the beginning and it's the end of all knowledge. But Emunah has the capacity of comforting a person from all of the ba'ayot for a moment, and in every moment, eternity is folded in. So first we have to determine for ourselves what our Eitz HaChaim means. What is that thing that if I eat from it, I'm okay? Right? One good thing about music is that when it hits you, you feel all right. What's that place in Torah? What's that place in Emunah that when you encounter it again in your mind, it settles everything out? A person needs that place. Sometimes a person needs a pasuk. Sometimes a person needs a phrase, a sefer, a tzaddik, some remnant, some she'iris that gives me the ability to jump right back into the Eitz HaChaim. And once I know what my Eitz HaChaim means for me, then I have to learn how to partake of it. I have to learn how to eat from it. I have to learn how to realize that Eliyahu HaNavi is gesturing to me that I have a free pathway right back into Gan Eden. You know why? Because I knew I'm imperfect in Gan Eden also. Gan Eden doesn't mean perfection. If we think Gan Eden meant perfection, then we have no right entering back in, and we'll never enter back in. But Adam and Chava knew they just didn't focus on it. So we don't have to be afraid of entering back into Gan Eden, because we know that the trick of the Eitz HaDa'as is not true. Chav, are you with me on what I'm saying?
Very much so.
You know this Ma'isa? It's my favorite Ma'isa. It's my favorite Ma'isa from the Heilige Rebbe of Zusha and the Rebbe of Elimelech. Zchus Amir Gan Aleinu. And the Rebbe of Zusha said, Melech, they say that every soul was in the soul of Adam Arishon at the time of the Chet. And so why didn't we stop him? Why didn't we stop him? And Rebbe Melech said to Rav Zusha, he said, Zusha, not only didn't we stop him, but we cajoled him, we encouraged him to eat from the Chet, from the Eitz. Why? He says, because had Adam overcome the desire to eat from the Eitz HaDa'as, then he would have lived with this lingering notion of what the snake had whispered, is that you can be like God. You can be perfect. You can be perfect like God. And it was worth it to eat from the Eitz HaDa'as and go through what we go through. Because now we realize that even after eating from the Eitz HaDa'as, we're still totally imperfect. We're still totally imperfect. It was worth it to eat from the Eitz HaDa'as to be aware of our imperfection. Because that's the consciousness of Eitz HaChaim. Eitz HaChaim is that I recognize that I'm deficient. I'm deficient. I had the schus of being by a tzaddik on Thursday night, by Rav Moshe Erlinger Shlita. He was a tremendous tzaddik and a goyin Etzem and just a light of lights. He should live and be well. And he said a Torah that I've been like meshuga on, that I want to share. That he asked the question of, why does the Torah always ascribe one blind eye to Bilam Harasha? The Torah seems to be defining him by this one blind eye. So he says it's as follows. He says that Hashem needed a prophet for the nations of the world, for Ovdei Avodah Zarah. But someone with the capacity of being a prophet is not going to want to go and hang out with Ovdei Avodah Zarah. Who in the world would want to go be a prophet for the nations of the world? So Hashem had to find someone with spiritual capacity, like a black belt in this stuff. And he was going to be the prophet. But still you have the problem of Hashras HaShechina. Prophet needs Hashras HaShechina. And how is the Shechina going to be shayr on a garbage heap like Bilam Harasha? And so the Tzaddik said is that Hashem gave him a nekev, he gave him a blemish, he made him a Baal Chisaron. And that's what draws the Shechina down. The Shechina rests in a place of Chisaron. When a person realizes they're deficient, that's where the Shechina rests. And therefore, any time that Bilam is going to be Nave and prophesizing, it's going to be associated with this blemish that he has, because it's the reminder that the only source of Hashras HaShechina is the awareness of deficiency. An amazing, amazing, amazing thing. This is the Ikar Nakuda. This is the Torah of Rav Tzadok HaKohen. This is the Torah of all of the tzaddikim, but not in the symptomatic way of thinking I can be perfect and then imperfection is hell. There's no such thing as perfection. Only Hashem is perfect. Kedushasi l'mala mikedushasechem. This, Rav Tzadok says, is the Ikar Chet of Shabtai Tzvi, of all of the Rishayim, not of all of the mistakes, is forgetting that God is always more perfect than us. And so this is what we have to learn to microdose the Eitz HaChaim. Right? We have to learn how to bring Eitz HaChaim back into our lives. We have to have moments throughout the day where we tap in to eat from it. The Maggid Mezrich says as follows. He says, Ve'etz HaChaim b'toich hagan, and the tree of life lives in the garden. Eitzah l'chaim, he reads it instead of Eitz HaChaim, Eitzah l'chaim is b'soich hagan. You want a recommendation for life? You want to know how to live? A simple recommendation. Di Eitzah, live as if you're still in Gan Eden. Have a place in your mind that's still in Gan Eden. That's Teshuvah. The Shuvu el Hashem, returning back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in order to do that, we have to let go of all of the chesronos. We have to let go of all of that self-consciousness. Now, the truth of the matter is, self-consciousness and shame and all of these heavy feelings, they don't radiate from no place. They radiate when we cross over at the boundaries and transgress the lines of our inherent moral and ethical alignment. And the neshama's ethical and moral alignment is Torah and mitzvos, das Hashem. So when we find ourselves in chait and in struggle, which is the definition of chisaron, so that's going to generate more shame and more Eitz HaDa'as consciousness and more distance. And so the first step of Teshuvah is azivas hachait, meaning a person can't expect to feel all right with themselves if they're actively doing something that is continuously making them feel not all right with themselves. A person has to be willing to put the effort in to try and feel all right, to allow oneself to feel all right. And that's the prerequisite for Teshuvah, but then we can enter into the Eitz HaChaim. It's the Eitz HaChaim is to eat from the Eitz HaChaim, to be present, to draw the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu into consciousness at this moment, to trap him in the mind. Pasuk in Shir Hashirim says, Melech Asur B'Rehitin, that it's a king who's tied up in cords. And the Tikkun Zohar says, don't read it as tied up in cords, but rather, Melech Asur B'Rehite Moicha, the king who's contained within the cords of the mind. Meaning we draw Hashem into our minds through consciousness. This is also Rav Tzadok. Consciousness is the site in which we encounter HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Speech, human experience, that's where we bring Hashem down. We make him real in our experiences. When a person has Hashem in their minds, in their consciousness, in their day-to-day meanderings, that's Eitz HaChaim living. And the more of us that continue to eat from the Eitz HaChaim, the more the world is transformed into a Gan Eden. Right? Gan Eden is not some other place. It is also, but there's a Gan Eden available in this world. And that's the secret of Motzei Shabbos. Motzei Shabbos is the secret of how to be in Shabbos even when you're outside of Shabbos. How to be in the Gan Eden even after you're outside of Gan Eden. We've lost the consciousness of Shabbos, but here we are talking about Shabbos, eating in honor of Shabbos, thinking about Shabbos. That's the secret of Mei'Ahavah Malka. Chazal tell us Mei'Ahavah Malka feeds one place, and it feeds this Etzem HaLuz. This Etzem HaLuz is the irreducible bone that continues to survive in spite of any death or destruction that affects it. Right? We've known this from halachic realities when burying ashes is a question. If you bury something where nothing remains. So real life, psak halacha is that no, something always remains. The eye can't see it, okay. And so the Etzem HaLuz is a real thing. The Heilige Gra says, and I repeat this very often, that Klal Yisrael at this point is the Etzem HaLuz. We're already post-death. He said this back in the time of the Churban. The destruction of the Beis HaMikdash was the death of Klal Yisrael, and exile from the land is burial. Anti-Semitism and the enemies of the Jews are the worms and the animals that eat away at the body. But nevertheless, there was vitality that remained. There was skeletal structure. There were yeshivos. There were institutions of holiness. Even that has fallen apart. And he says, all we have left now is like the last remnant of life, the kusta de chiyusa, and we're waiting for tchiyas hamesim. So what is this stubborn consciousness that survives death? What is it that remains after being kicked out of Gan Eden? What is it that remains after falling? What is it that remains after Shabbos departs? And the secret is that it's the one part that never ever leaves. There's one part within the soul that cannot be erased. It cannot be erased. It cannot be impinged upon. There's lyrics from Matisyahu where he says, there is a place in the bottom of the soul. It's the place of destitution. It's a place of destitution. There's a place in the bottom of the soul. It's the place of destitution. There is no solution. You have no words to flow, no questions or solutions. Bedrock at the bottom of the soul, a place of no restitution. Something like this in his language. It's the Etzem HaLuz is the part of Emunah that remains. that part of the soul that remains whatever blemish it's received. However we fall, however deep we get into Eitz HaDa'as consciousness, we remember the Eitz HaChaim. We remember the Eitz HaChaim. We connect ourselves to HaChaim, to the life force that remains no matter what. That's the secret of Teshuvah, returning back to the life force, to the vitality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that is always there. That's the Etzem HaLuz. This bone that exists, it denies the possibility of death. It can't be erased. In the mind, it's Emunah and hope. Rav Weinberger has been learning Zusha Kivui from Rabbi Haramchal. And Beit Shemesh is a place of Kivui because it's a place of Shimshon HaGibor. Rav Tzadok spoke so much about Shimshon HaGibor. He was a hero. When Rav Tzadok came to Panovich, and he was a crossover agent, he was a secret agent because he was already learning Rav Tzadok's Svarim on miracle. Because Kemat, people didn't want to publish Mei Shiloach, they're like, what is this? Forget about having it in Litvish yeshivas. But then comes along Rav Tzadok and he's like, no, everything my Rebbe said has like 12 Gemaras supporting it. They're like, oh, let's learn this and call him a Baal Machshava. Remember I said to Rav Weinberger once, I referred to Rav Tzadok as a Baal Machshava, and he says Rav Tzadok was Eish. He was Eish, he was a chassid of the Mei Shiloach, but he's a crossover agent. And so the first teaching that Rav Tzadok gave when he came to Panovich was about Rav Tzadok's teachings of Shimshon. It was ultimately like how no matter how you fall like Shimshon, and that's where Mashiach comes from. And again, we all have falls like Shimshon in our mind. Even the slightest deviation from the way we want to be with Hashem is a fall like Shimshon's fall. And no, this I don't want to be rambling, Chavra, and I want my words to be meaningful, and I'm enjoying. I don't know if I've been speaking for 2 hours at this point, but we'll take a break here.